It's holiday season 2022, that means one thing and one thing only. It's time for me to grab you ho-ho-hos by the hand as I take you on a whimsical journey looking over the last 12 months in street art, protest art, muralism, graffiti, and much, much more in my yearly roundup of all things art in the public space. I'm definitely a little bit older and a little bit grayer than when I first started doing these, but my name's still Doug, and you're still watching FWTV. With the world largely releasing itself from the clutches of the COVID-19 pandemic, 2022 was ushered in with the promise of a return to normality. I'm sitting here 12 months later, and I guess this is normality I find myself in, although I'm not entirely sure that we've returned to anything. Let's take a look at how the art world has responded to the chaos and calamity of this roller coaster that we've been collectively riding. I've always been drawn to the kind of public art that acts as a direct reflection to the wider world, the work that pulls in this idea of a shared collective experience. And 2022 has had no shortage of such art. Without question, the biggest news story of the year was the Russian invasion of Ukraine that started back in February. The war Vladimir Putin had hoped would be over in a matter of days still continues as I record this now. With winter once again settling in, those on the front line are experiencing the closest to hell that we have on Earth, and the rest of the world just continues to watch in disbelief. The art world's response to this was immediate, and it was also pretty mixed. With some opting for poignant solidarity, others expressed their opinions in slightly less conventional ways. If 2021 was defined by characters wearing masks, surely 2022 will be defined by the peace symbol and the colours of the Ukraine flag. However, Australian artist Peter Seaton learned a pretty hard lesson in solidarity when his mural depicting a Ukrainian and Russian soldier embracing in a hug was unilaterally called out for creating a moral equivalence between the aggressor and the victim. I'm sure he came into this with good intentions, but solidarity doesn't really work if you've managed to piss off the people you're supposed to be supporting. Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to spend some time with the Ukrainian-American artist Maya Hayuk, who spent some time in Belgium creating this mural for the Crystal Ship Festival. The mural itself celebrated Ukrainian heritage through the visual language of the traditional embroidery techniques that she learned as a child. If you're interested, I did a full interview with Maya for the Radio Juxtaposed podcast. You can go back and listen after this. I will put a link in the description below. Staying in Ukraine for a minute, the Kyiv-based artist Waone Interesni has spent the year tirelessly campaigning to keep Ukraine in the conversation. In amongst the surreal nature of his work is this deeply symbolic imagery that really helps generate a conversation. Waone also linked up with the French photographer JR back at the start of the conflict for what was maybe one of the more controversial projects to come out of the Ukraine conflict.
Called him, he explained me the situation in his city, and then I said, okay, let me find a way to come here and do something.
Not one to miss an opportunity, JR was straight there, parachuted right to the heart of the conflict for an intervention. Look, I'm going to be honest with you, I always get a bit nervous when I see high-profile artists like this interject themselves into scenarios like this. There's such a fine line between genuine compassion and engagement versus capitalizing off the misery and pain of others. I do think JR is one of those artists that maybe walks this line a little too closely, every so often just crossing over, but credit where it's due, I think this project actually really did work. He took a photo of a young girl, Valeria, who he met at one of the checkpoints as she was fleeing for her life. The large-scale printout was revealed with help from the people of Lviv, and the image that he created managed to capture the hearts and attention of the world. And I think it's really easy to point a finger and sort of say that he capitalized off of this, but the reality is he made an impact through his artwork that I don't think anybody else this year has actually come close to matching. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this probably was the most impactful piece of street art that we saw this year. I'm not entirely sure I felt the same when it came to Banksy's project in Ukraine. The pieces themselves on these sort of bombed out buildings in various sites had all the markings of classic Banksy street pieces, but as a project it didn't quite pack the punch of something that I would call truly groundbreaking. If I'm being a little unfair here, I think this is probably just because it's Banksy, and I've held him in such high regard for so long. I've always come to expect the unexpected when it comes to him, and this project itself just felt maybe a little predictable. I think that might be the first time I've said anything negative about Banksy on this channel in like 7 years, so there's a first. Sorry, big man. If it was the courage of a khaki-clad Zelensky that dominated the European conversation, then surely it was the fearless determination of the women of Iran that stole the Middle Eastern show. In defiance of the ultra-conservative control and censorship of female autonomy, women across the Islamic Republic devailed and threw up their fists in one of the biggest fuck yous we've seen in a generation. It's in cases like this that we really see the various roles that street art can play across the world. The murals of solidarity in peaceful Western cities help shine a light on the conversation, but no matter how detailed or how beautiful the work might be, nothing compares to a single mark made by an individual on the ground living that reality. Over the years I've been asked a lot where the best cities are for street art, and I find this a really hard question to answer because it's like, how do you compare the large-scale commissioned works in cities like LA, New York, Berlin, London against the stencils and graffiti that are done by young activists that are calling out authoritarian regimes in areas like Tehran? These artists are risking every single personal freedom that they have for this message, and that for me carries a lot more weight than something that's done to beautify a community. With that said, we do have these same individuals risking their freedoms for a cause they believe in right here in the West. They're just not the ones that are painting the large-scale commissioned murals. They're the ones that are taking fire extinguishers to car dealerships and throwing soup over Van Gogh in museums.
Security!
There's a lot of talk around this idea of the right kind of protest. We all support nurses and postal workers, but can they not just strike at a time that's slightly more convenient for us? Can they not just go through the official channels for change? The reality is change isn't given to anybody, it's taken. And every single one of those climate geeks that's put down Dungeons and Dragons for 2 seconds to glue themselves to a Picasso deserves not just our attention, but our applause. If you don't agree with me here, then let's have this conversation again in 10 years' time when politicians are being shot in the street, when climate refugees are now in their millions. Just take a look at how change has happened throughout history, and we've seen how this works, from women's liberation to the civil rights movement to the Good Friday Agreement. Change is forcibly taken, it's never given. And if I'm entirely honest with you, it feels like this kind of protest is just the start of what's to come in the future. It was a weird year for Kanye fans. I don't want to talk too much about that. What always made street art so appealing for me was the idea that it was a form of pure expression, free from the hands of corporate greed. As the popularity of this movement has grown over the years, this dynamic has slightly shifted. And I think as we look forward, the key to its survival is a harmonious relationship between these two entities, creative expression and financial gain. When I see areas like Shoreditch in London get completely dominated by advertising dressed up as street art, it makes me think that the lifespan of this cultural capital is finite. Eventually it will hit a point where the people of these communities push back and say, actually, I don't want any more of this advertising taking up my visual landscape. Not that any normal person would ever use those words to say it, but you know what I mean. And this is what makes this idea of a partnership so important, this balance between the two, and I think it's really important to understand who's at the helm of these projects. Is the work in your neighborhood being controlled by an agency driven by commercial operations, or is it being driven by a curator or an organization with a real genuine passion for the arts? For those living in areas lucky enough to survive the financial pressures of COVID, Mural Festivals were back on the cards this year, and it felt like they were needed now more than ever. This year I was lucky enough to be invited to Belgium's Crystal Ship Festival, Nuair Aberdeen's triumphant and welcome return to Scotland, Louis Massai's inaugural Rise Up residency in Margate, and also participated in Mural Fest Kosovo. The thing that really stood out for me over the last year attending festivals and other events like this is how easy it is to take them for granted. The COVID pandemic shattered so many of these projects, and it's only when they're taken away that you realise the value that they add to both the neighbourhoods and the wider art community. It's really easy for us to get sucked into the allure of high quality, high value, large scale productions, but there's a piece of my heart specifically reserved for smaller interventions. Just like the simplicity of this piece by the Portuguese artist Octavio Serra for Trash Plant Festival in the Canary Islands. Or these mixed media collages by Misprinted. Or random abstract assemblages like this one by the Iranian brothers Icy and Salt for Civita Festival in Italy. I don't know if it's just me, but it definitely felt like there was more climate-related murals and projects this year. The Rise Up residency that I mentioned earlier specialised in ocean literacy and local ecology, and I think this idea of hyper-localised conversations through the murals is something that we should all welcome with open arms. Spanish artist Dados Punto has continued to keep environmental waste in the conversation through a series of murals throughout the year. Similarly, the Swiss duo Never Crew continue to highlight our relationship with the planet and other species we share with it, and the French artist Saipei's location-specific environmental pieces continue to capture the attention of the world. I also really loved Rich T's heritage piece in a small town in Devon. Small towns in Devon tend not to have much in the way of muralism, so I'm sure this ruffled a few feathers, and I am all for that. Climate might have been the dominating theme this year, but it definitely wasn't the only one. I really enjoyed the unapologetic and direct nature of the imagery in this mural by Norwegian artist Eva Jansen Stovvold. Eva Jansen Stovvold. I don't think I've said that right. I think there's so much more space that needs to be occupied by queer artists and murals championing the LGBT+ community. I also have to give a special mention to the Spanish artist Alba Fabri for her piece at the Rexenera Festival in Spain. I think the raw intimacy and emotion displayed in this makes it one of the most hauntingly relatable murals I've seen all year, and to be honest, I could do an entire video just on this one piece. I got so many more muralists and artists I want to give a shout out to. Ares continues again and again to showcase this amazing evolution in his visual language. Sebas Velasco has had an amazing year. He just takes this thing that he does and he's just tighter and tighter every single time. The guy is phenomenal. Then there was Anna Barija, who is just on her own planet at the moment. Zane Prater has had a great year. I love watching his work just continue to grow. This piece by Tima was so special. For mural painters, there was so much talent out there at the moment. It is amazing to watch. Back in June, I saw this really interesting project in Belgrade in Serbia, and it was aimed at bringing the visually impaired into the conversation of muralism. Accompanying the murals in the city were 3D models and braille descriptions next to the wall. That way the hard of sight got a chance to feel their way around the mural and experience the impact that it makes. And I just think that this is such a beautiful concept. I'd love to see this rolled out way wider than it's currently being used. I tell you what though, after all this, if there is one thing that we have not been talking about in 2022, it's the metaverse and its NFTs.
Such an incredible thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I jumped in.
I know, I heard. I'm so happy I taught you what they were.
You did. You taught me what's up, and then I bought an ape.
I got an ape too, because I saw you on the show with Beeple, and you said you got a MoonPay, so I went and I copied you and did the same thing.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
This is your
mine.
ape.
Yeah,
We debuted.
it's really cool. Like the hat, the shades.
And what?
I'm not too sure if it's that us as consumers aren't quite ready to embrace this kind of technology, or it's that actually they're just a bit shit. What really struck me though this year is the power and the accessibility of AI generating software like Midjourney or DALL-E. Through just a couple of prompts, these high concept ideas are suddenly brought to life. like this Princess Diana Adidas collaboration that never existed, or these black heavy metal goth fans from the 90s that never existed. The possibilities of this software are currently endless. I'm not entirely sure where this plays into the idea of street art yet, but it's really an interesting conversation for creators and where the future of this lies. Because ultimately, we could be looking at the automation of creativity as we know it. I'm knackered after that, but I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like I've only just scratched the surface of 2022. I promise I won't leave it so long until the next time I do one of these. I hope wherever you're locked in from, you're watching this from a place of peace. This can be a pretty challenging time of year at the best of times, and it still feels like it's pretty tough out there at the moment. And I hope you found as much comfort as you have inspiration in looking through some of the art that we've seen today. I don't know, sometimes it's just good to remind yourself that there are cool people out there doing really cool things. So with that, be kind to yourself and those around you. Till next time, my name's Doug. This was Fifth Wall TV.
What?